Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you are doing really well. In today's video, I wanted to share a week in my life as a teacher. I thought about creating this series here on my YouTube channel just as a way to document what I do on a week-to-week basis in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom in my job as a teacher. And I'm hoping that in doing this, it's also helpful and useful to some of you who might be wondering what it's like to be a teacher in the UK. Now, if you are new here, hi, hello. My name is Sophia. I'm a science secondary school teacher in the UK, and I run this little community page here on YouTube just to share some advice and tips, all to do with teaching. So if this is something that interests you, then definitely subscribe to the channel. I'd also be really keen to know who you are and what you do and what your journey with teaching is. So leave me a comment in the section down below. Okay, so in today's video, I want to share with you how my first and second week of the new academic year has been. I have a tea with me, so if you want to grab yourself a hot drink just to be here with me, then please do so. What's on the agenda is for me to talk to you about the inset days I had on the first and second day, how I got myself ready and organised in terms of my teacher diary planner, my medium-term plans, my seating plans, my first lessons, and then I'll also share with you a little bit of my new role at the school and a bit of the work I've been doing with that, and then a little bit of what is on my to-do list and things I have to look forward to. Right, so first, inset days. Now, if the term inset is new to you, all that really means is a day where teachers are expected to be at school, but not the students. So usually the inset days at the start of the academic year are really to set the tone for the start of the year and to make sure that everyone is together. If there have been changes to things, that everyone's updated on that. That's always typically the same kind of layout. They tend to be jam-packed days, and there's always department time, and then a little bit of time for teachers to kind of get ready for the week. The inset day at my school certainly was kind of in line with what I just described. I'll share with you a little bit of the agenda now. So we had a welcome at the start of the day. Then we had kind of updates because my school is part of a multi-academy trust. Then we have the exam results update, and that just goes through how the school is doing and performing across multiple subjects, particular cohort of students where some might have underperformed and others less so. And then we had a session on safeguarding, behaviour updates to the behaviour policy. The start of the academic year also set some goals. Our head teacher was keen to give us a bit of an update as to his vision and what he would like us to be a part of. Then we had a session from the teaching and learning assistant head, just to do with our practice and how we should start our lessons and what to focus on in the coming weeks. Then we had a bit of lunch, followed by department time, which was helpful to get everyone in subject teams. And then we had a pastoral meeting as a tutor, and heads of year as well had a separate meeting. And then we had about an hour or two to ourselves to make sure that we completed some online safeguarding training, but then also had some time to do our IT logins and make sure that everything was working. So that was a jam-packed day, as day ones tend to always be. I did have a couple of things that I wrote down, and I thought that they were really interesting, and I did want to share them. I think sometimes on these inset days, it's very easy to switch off and just think, there's all these little updates and what am I doing with this? But sometimes there are nuggets of information that are really powerful and make you think about, who you are as a teacher and why you're here as a teacher. And this one really struck a chord with me, so I wanted to share it with you. One of our morning sessions, led by someone in our multi-academy trust, he shared with us that less than 1% of all students in schools are looked after children. Yet when we look at youth that have ended up in prison, 65% of all of that youth are children who were looked after. And that is such a shocking statistic. And I think it really speaks volumes as to our roles as teachers to these children who are looked after and how much of an influence school can be. we were particularly talking about how attendance is a huge issue for these children and finding ways and strategies to make sure that they actually turn up to school so that they can benefit from the provision we give them. So that was a really interesting one for me. There was also another shocking statistic that I hadn't actually fully realized or gotten, my head round, but it was that 1 in 4 children live in poverty in the UK. And to me, that's really sad. 25% are living in poverty. And yeah, it just made me reflect a little bit on my expectations of students in terms of their attention, because it relies on them having been fed and having the right amount of energy throughout the day and being hydrated, but also my expectations of students and being equipped and having, a pen and a calculator, and perhaps if they've lost that, their families aren't really able to replace it. Now, this doesn't mean that, we should make excuses for students who do this and there's no reason for it, but it definitely made me just sit in those statistics and think a little bit about them. Now, it's no surprise that my school was talking a lot about a DS focus. So, DS is disadvantaged students. And as always, these students have underperformed when we did our exam results analysis meeting and when we discussed the goals for the year. So, there's a real push this academic year for us to really think about our teaching and our provision to those students experiencing disadvantage, to make sure that they have equal opportunities and an equitable experience to other students who don't. So I think I definitely, in terms of my own teaching practice, I want to think a little bit more about who those students are in my classroom and how am I going to go above and beyond to make sure that they can do the very best that we hope them to do. We also discussed, which I don't think will be a surprise as it's a common theme across the country, but we discussed how boys are underperforming compared to girls. And so there's a lot to be said around organisation of students and, being equipped and understanding when different assessments are and revision materials, but also the impact of social time on their learning time, because often boys during social time, at least at my school, that's where a lot of our behaviour issues tend to be. And so then that takes it all back into the classroom and it often derails the lesson. Now, there was some phrasing around trying to make sure students who experience disadvantage or who are a boy, so that's kind of our focus, we had a little sentence just to kind of get us thinking a little bit more about how we're going to support them. And it is to engage, support, equip, seat, question, and feedback first. And I really liked that. So I've written it in my teacher diary and I put a nice little box around it just to remind myself if I'm feeling a little bit stuck on where to start. So that was day one. And now day two welcomed us with a 4 hour session in the hall, which I have given feedback to our senior leadership team that was probably not the ideal way to structure it. Because everybody was flagging. But that is where we had sessions on attendance, how to fill in academic reports, fire safety, lockdown safety, duties, IT systems, how to do trips, student attendance. I think I might have said that already, the role of a tutor. And then we had a session on special educational needs and how we should teach them, and medical students who experience medical conditions and how we should support them. And then we also had a training session on teaching students who wear hearing aids. And so we have 2 students in our school at the moment that that is applicable to. So if we teach them, then we had that training. And then after that, we had a little bit of lunch, and then we had the whole afternoon in department time. At the end of the day, I did attend a middle leader session, and then I was done for the day. So day two felt that I had a little bit more time for myself, but because of that 4 hour session in the morning, I was definitely flagging a little bit in the afternoon and didn't feel my most productive self. Some takeaways from that day was predominantly discussions around homework and how we should set it and how we should try to support students to complete as much of it, but also how we should maybe set some sanctions and liaise with home and parents to support them in getting it done. There was no actual answer or outcome to these discussions, but we started to have them, particularly for core subjects, so that we can align our strategy and get the ball rolling when the kids start. Okay, now I started to set up my teacher diary. I will hopefully take a little photo of this and kind of put it here so you can kind of see. So after those 2 inset days, we then had the first teaching day, which only year 7 and year 11 were in. And that was really helpful because it meant that I'm not really teaching much. I actually only had one lesson that day to my year 11s who I already taught last year, so I already knew them. And then the second day, all students were in, but obviously in the morning there was assembly time for them, and we also then had to take certain classes at different times to an IT room to make sure that they could log in with their new email accounts. So a little bit of disruption to the first couple of days. There were also some student photos. So those first couple of days, there was a lot of cross reference and checking against the calendar and different emails to make sure that, I had the class in front of me for however long. Now, part of my new role, which is to support teaching and learning in my school, I did 2 hours of learning walks just to see how students were settling into lessons and getting on with teachers. I prioritize going to departments that have a bigger staff turnaround from last year. So students were going to be meeting teachers for the first time. And I also prioritize going to subjects where students don't tend to always get into the classroom. So we have a little bit of an issue in my school of truancy. And so I just prioritized doing that. And I ended up dealing with a few situations where students were truanting or students were feeling very nervous and anxious to get into the classroom. So I just supported them and the teacher, and I caught up with a couple of new staff just to see that they had settled in well. And I then had a meeting with the assistant head of teaching and learning just to discuss how we wanted to record feedback from learning walks, depending on who does it. So the expectation is obviously that senior leadership team, so SLT, and then myself in supporting teaching and learning will do regular learning walks, but we also have the expectation that heads of department and subject will do those. Now, if you're not really sure what learning walk means, it just means where someone will go into a classroom where a lesson is happening and they will just observe a part of that lesson to see how the students are engaging with the learning, how the teacher is teaching and delivering that lesson, and ultimately just to see if progress is being made and if all students are engaged and enjoying the lesson. So in the meeting where we were discussing how to collate that, we ended up deciding on trialing a Google form where anyone who is observing a lesson will just fill this in. We had some criteria already signposted, so some questions with Likert scales from 1 to 5, from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and we focused it on a few things like engagement, subject knowledge, feedback, and a few other things that I can't quite remember right now. But I was really happy with that discussion and that meeting. Felt really productive that we have something new, and that was shared with SLT to trial for the week. And then at the end of the week, the second week, we then share that with middle leaders, heads of department and subject, to have a go at doing that with their own learning walks for their teams. Okay, so week 1 for me was really light in terms of my teaching. Week 2, I had lots of lessons, obviously, just following my normal timetable. So something that I had to do quite a lot was just prep my first lessons. And because there was a change in the behaviour policy, I wanted to make it really clear to students, because sometimes, unfortunately, you can't always guarantee that a tutor has gone through all of the information for the start of the academic year with their tutor group. And that is often where those conversations around the behaviour policy, sanctions, consequences, and praise happen. So I wanted to make sure that I delivered that very clearly to all of my students so that I was reassured that they heard it from me, and that we then had this pact as to how we were going to behave in my lesson. So I tweaked those slides, and I have to say that the first lessons did go pretty well. I just had a challenging Year 9 class. They are new to me, and I had already met them last year for a different reason. And so there's a few students in there that, firstly, are weak academically, but then also, secondly, can be a little bit disruptive and unkind. And so they did test me a little bit at the start of the lesson. But I'd say after 20, 30 minutes, I think I established myself, and we were able to then get on with what I had planned to do. Now, those first lessons, I always try to include a little bit of content. I think it's important for the first lesson to not purely be about expectations and rules and, start of topic and start of term. I think it's important for them to finish the lesson having learned something, because that is part of them building trust in you as their teacher and looking forward to the next lesson, is having that sense of achievement. Right, now that I've spoken to you about Inset days and my new role and how my first lessons have been and what I've had to do in terms of lesson planning, I want to share with you a bit of what my to-do list for week 2 looked like. So week 2 was very much getting my safeguarding training done. That is just reviewing the safeguarding. We have to do that every single year. And then also updating my prevent and radicalization training. So all of that took about 2 to 3 hours, and I've probably got another hour left until it's completely finished. Something else that was on my to-do list was to order my requisition for my practical work in science. So in order to do that, I just had to make sure that my medium-term plans were really up to date. So I just tweaked those and made sure that I color-coded when my practical work is happening, just to make it easier going forward when I have to order practical work for my lessons. I then also made sure that a big task for me this week was to bulk lesson plan. I think with planning lessons at the start of the year, you're very much tweaking, and it doesn't quite feel like the right type of lesson to be delivering, because you don't really teach a lot of content. And with the weeks coming up, I definitely have lots of different lessons for different topics. And so I just wanted to make some time to bulk prep year 10 and year 11 lessons, because that's what I teach predominantly. And I had taught those topics last year, so I knew it wasn't going to take me very long, and it was very much about refining the starter questions and making sure I had answers to those questions, and also just making sure I had enough tasks to do and that they were broken up a little bit more. I think historically I tended to teach quite, upfront. I would front load quite a lot of my teaching, and then we would do a bit of practice. But it hasn't quite worked at this new school that I'm working at, because students tend to want to process a lot more frequently. And so I'm just having to refine and tweak my resources, where after the starter, I teach a small portion of new content, and then we practice, and then I teach the next bit, and then we practice, and so on. And then maybe after 2 or 3 lessons, then I can give them a little bit longer to do a task. And so there's a lot of time management in delivering that lesson and making sure that I'm keeping my pace right, so that I get through all of the lesson that I've planned. The final thing that was on my to-do list, for obvious reasons, was getting my seating plans sorted and making sure that I knew exactly who were my students with special educational needs and what those were. So I had to do quite a little bit of reading of their SEND profile and strategies that work for them, and also just make a note of specific requirements. So where to sit them, who to sit them next to, if closer to the door or not. And also some of our students do need resources on yellow paper or blue paper. And so just making a note of that, so that I can make sure I'm printing things correctly for them. And the final thing on my to-do list was just to manage my email inbox, make sure that I had responded to a few parent queries and staff queries, and to schedule things going forward. I ended up planning and mapping out my remaining weeks of this half term on my teacher diary, cross-referencing that with the calendar, and then also blocking in some meeting time with several different people to tackle different tasks that are coming up. So there you have it. That is episode 1 of my week as a teacher in the UK. I hope that you found it useful and it was interesting to know a little bit of the behind the scenes of what happens in my day to day as a teacher in a secondary school. I'd be so curious to know what it is for you. So if you're happy to share, please do so in the comment section down below. And I will see you soon with episode 2 of this new series. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you a wonderful week ahead. See you soon. Bye.